Anybody want to guess who the member of the public is?
Was that Jeffrey Kaufman?
Oh, it sure is.
He's still taking
You
an
didn't get
interest?
that on live feed yet, so I can say it.
That's funny. I left my phone upstairs. I'm sure there's a text as well.
Is he still very emotionally engaged with what goes on? Yeah.
And then, of course, whatever mistake we make, he'll be teaching at university.
Okay, so I pulled that one up from there. So I can see if there's any different. Agenda packet. Okay, here we go. I just got to follow the instructions a little bit and I'll be fine.
We just started the stream, right, Ally? So, but the meeting hasn't started.
Yes, he is watching.
Good afternoon. I now call this Governance Standing Policy Committee meeting to order. I'll do the acknowledgement statement. City of Lethbridge acknowledges that we are gathered on the lands of the Blackfoot people of the Canadian Plains and pays respect to the Blackfoot people past, present, and future, while recognizing and respecting their cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationships to the land. The City of Lethbridge is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I'll now do a roll call. Councillor Carlson.
Present.
Councillor Middleton Hope.
Present.
Acting Mayor Dodick. Deputy Mayor Crowson.
Present.
Is the election of chair, then vice chair. I hereby call for nominations for the position of chairman.
I nominate Belinda Crowson.
Councillor, or acting deputy mayor, sorry. Do you agree to put your name forward for the position of chairman?
Sure, thank you.
Are there any other nominations for chairman?
I move nomination cease.
Thank you.
Sorry, Belinda.
I declare to be elected as chairman by acclamation, Deputy Mayor Crowson. Congratulations. Would you like to sit here or there? Yes, you do.
All right, I plan to miss half the meeting, so who wants to be vice chair? We'll open nominations for vice chair.
I nominate Rico Joduk.
I decline. I nominate Councillor John Middleton Hope and declare nominations closed.
I decline.
Jeff, you're the only last person standing since you weren't here today.
If all three of us decline, you have to show up at all the meetings?
No, I think then we just draw a name out of a hat. Pretty sure that's the democratic way.
Okay, Reiko or John, I don't mind filling as deputy, but if either of you wanted it, I have no problem not being deputy.
Congratulations, Jeff.
Excellent. Well done.
All right, so we will call the nominations cease. Motions?
It was a very difficult campaign. My expenses were outrageous.
All right, so we'll move on to the agenda, and the next motion is the adoption of the agenda. The agenda is sent out before you with the consent agenda, presentation, submissions. Do we have anything that has been added to the agenda, Bonnie?
No, there were no revisions or amendments to today's agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Can I get a motion to adopt the agenda as presented? Okay. All right. I think I'm going to go back in case, unless anybody has a concern, I think I'm going to go back to what I did in the last council. For consent and an agenda, we'll do it by consensus if anybody has any concerns. You guys fine? So we had a motion on the agenda, but we're fine with that. Consent agenda is before you. It has the minutes from the September 17th and the status of initiatives. The status of initiatives lays out some things that we can bring back to this SPC to see if we want to continue with it or if it's not of interest to move on. But that is something that I will work on with the city clerk to bring those back at a further date. So the only thing we have there is that for information at this time, and we have the minutes. So by consensus, are we good with adopting the consent agenda? Okay, seeing nobody who has any concerns, we move on to presentations. And the presentation for this afternoon is Chris Lestuka from People and Culture Business Partner Compensation. So this is on an update to policy CC10, City Council Remuneration and Benefits. Mr. Lestuka, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Deputy Mayor Crowson, members of council, thank you for the opportunity to present today. As mentioned, I'm going over policy CC10. It's been a number of years since this has been reviewed, so making some proposed changes or making some recommendations for proposed changes to the policy. There's two different types of changes that I'm recommending in here. There's what I'll call the housekeeping, which are just essentially some minor changes to reflect current practices. And the second are more substantive changes that actually change the operation of the policy. For the purpose of my presentation today, I'm going to focus more on the substantive changes. So to keep my presentation brief, to give you maximum time for discussion on that. So I thought the easiest way to do this would just be to go through the policy and highlight each of the more substantive changes in there. So looking at on the first page under the compensation section of the policy statement, the first paragraph there discusses the adjustments and the changes to compensation on an annual basis. What I'm proposing in there is that we add in a sentence saying, unless directed otherwise by a unanimous resolution of council. The reasoning for this is to address a scenario that we've had in the last couple of years where there's been votes to freeze and roll back salaries. So the reason for this is, or there's two aspects to this change. The first is it gives us more flexibility to address those changes within the policy. And the second is adding that the resolutions need to be unanimous. This was based on the unanimous nature of it was based on a recommendation by the city solicitor that if some changes and some negative changes are made, it could and the decisions aren't unanimous, it could result in some legal exposure to the city. And this is a result of the fact that the compensation information is shared in the information package to prospective council candidates. So if these rates are changed and those without unanimous consent, it can have some exposure, but making these changes unanimous would mitigate those risks. The second proposed change is in the middle of page 2, the second last paragraph of the compensation policy statement. What I'm proposing is that we add in a sentence there capturing how the deputy mayor position is paid, because at present, the policy is silent on that right now, so we're just capturing a detail on there. The other factor that's not mentioned in here right now is the acting mayor. Right now, the acting mayor isn't a compensated position, so I just wanted to raise that for your discussion, whether we capture that in the policy or not. The second set of more substantive changes take place in the responsibilities section, primarily point E of that section on the third page. Right now, so point E looks at the external salary reviews that right now are done in the first and the third year of a council term. The change I'm proposing here is that we modify this approach so the review is done in the third year of a council term, so the year before the election, and then any recommendations for change from that review are implemented in the year after the election, so on January 1st of the year after the election for the new council. The reason for this is twofold. One, in my review of the policy and other policies, I haven't found examples of other municipalities that do 2 reviews in a term. And the second is that this approach where we would do the review in the year before the election and implement it the year after the election is becoming sort of the norm in the mid-sized cities group. Right now, the cities of Grand Prairie, Medicine Hat, and Red Deer follow a similar approach. The final more substantive change I'm proposing is still in section E, right at the bottom. This is about also in the vein of the external review that's performed. What I'm proposing is that we add in some language to cover off the scenario that if the external review comes back and our salaries are above that average. Right now, the policy is silent on this, so what I'm proposing is we add in language for a practice that shows if it comes back that the salaries are above it, our salaries will be frozen until such time as the average moves up to meet or exceed our salary, and that'll be done by applying the annual adjustments to it or based on the next review, whichever comes first. So that concludes my summary of the more substantive changes to the policy.
Thank you, and I do know we have questions. I know Councillor Carlson has a question to begin.
Thank you, Chairman Crowson. Thanks, Michelle Stuka, for this. In the policy I'm reading, you mentioned a change early on. I can't remember. It was the first change you recommended making about the unanimity of a vote.
Yes.
Did you add language? I didn't see it.
Yes, that is in...
Where is it?
Under the policy statement, the first paragraph, there, the second and third line. So it is a policy of the City of Lethbridge to compensate...
Nope, I see it now. Thank you. Thank you. Found that. The second one is on the acting mayor expenses. You didn't add anything in for that?
No, I didn't, because at this point in time, the acting mayor isn't a compensated position. So I just wanted to bring that up for discussion. Did you want it added into there as a unpaid position, or would you like to consider if compensation is warranted for it?
And thanks for bringing that up. I'd like to have some discussion with my colleagues about this. It doesn't happen frequently, but it has happened occasionally where the deputy mayor sort of delegates or relegates their duties for the bulk of their term, and the acting mayor picks up the slack. And I've often found that in those rare cases, there's a bit of unfairness, I'll put it that way, about the compensation. And so honestly, I think it might be a good idea to compensate the acting mayor, maybe not to the same degree, but at least somewhat. But that's just my initial thought. But I'd love to hear what my colleagues think about that. It's not a huge increase in pay, but it is an acknowledgement of the extra time for agenda review committee, et cetera.
To be fair, I did give you wine when you had to step in for me.
You did. It wasn't me that I was thinking of, Belinda. But yes, I did step in for a week for Belinda, and she gave me 3 bottles of wine. It was more compensation than I needed.
Thank you. Councillor Middleton Hope, your question?
As long as the wine was wine that you liked.
It was very good.
Mr. Lestuka, I enjoy actually the presentation that you're providing for us on the screen. Not being familiar with this policy or in regards to compensation, you talked in terms of things that had changed. Of course, the document that I have shows the changes. And this is very helpful to allow us to see what changes you're proposing. So thank you for that. The second piece that I'd like, I wonder if you could address for me, is in Part E, in which you talk about compensation. You talked about freezing compensation should it appear that the salaries of council are higher than the comparative analysis. What I don't see you explain is, if they are lower, is there a process for those salaries to be adjusted without having to go through an additional process?
Oh, sorry, yeah, that is, yeah, that is sort of the automatic process that happens right now. So if the salaries review comes back and shows that our salaries are below that of the average, our salaries are adjusted on that basis. So that would be what I'm proposing in the first part there right now, where it's done in the first and the third year. I'm proposing that it be done in the third year of the term, and then any change, whether it be negative or positive, is implemented on January 1st of the year following the election.
So you're proposing that it goes to the third year of this term?
Yeah.
And when was it done in the last term?
It would have been done in the third year of the last term, but there was a freeze in place, so it wasn't reviewed. So the last time it would have been reviewed is the first year of the last term. So 4 years ago now.
So you're recommending that it be done every 4 years?
Yes.
Effectively?
Yeah, that is more in line with what other comparative examples are doing, or what other municipalities are doing.
Okay. Considering the economic circumstances that we find ourselves in, with council agreeing to voluntarily reduce salaries, would it be appropriate to revisit that sooner than the third year of this term?
Yeah, there is the possibility, and that's sort of what I was envisioning, where I proposed that change in the first section, where the compensation is reviewed on an annual basis unless directed otherwise by unanimous resolution of council. So it builds in more flexibility into that. So this is what the policy says, but if council would like to review it, it can be, a resolution can provide that direction.
Thanks for your patience. This is a good education for me as I get up to speed. Thank you.
That's the advantage of SPCs. They're a lot more informal, and we can have good conversations at this. All right, since Councillor Carlson, you have another question?
Thank you, Chairman Croson. John raised a point that just sort of twigged with me. If we just move forward and leave this business as usual, council's salary or compensation will not be reviewed again for 3 years. Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, and it wouldn't actually be implemented in the term of this council. It wouldn't be implemented until the next council.
because that's one of the challenges I'm concerned about is holding off for too long on that, because comparators, I don't believe, did any rollbacks, and so after 7 years, it may look. One of the things we tried to do away with when this was instituted, I don't know, a decade ago, was massive jumps in salary when council's salary or compensation had not been reviewed for many years. And it would look to the public, oh, council's getting a 42% raise. I'm just picking a number, because it wasn't done regularly. And that's one of my concerns. If it's 7 years since the last comparison is looked at, we could be looking at having to approve a fairly substantial increase for council. Am I wrong in thinking that, or am I seeing something differently?
From my perspective, I think that is a legitimate concern there, especially with the 10% rollback and the fact that our normal comparator group didn't do that. There will be most likely a jump the next time the review is conducted.
And so you're thinking that the addition of the by unanimous consent is a way around that? Or if we didn't change the policy to only the third year and then implement it in the first, would that be another way of getting around that massive jump?
So just to clarify that I'm understanding what you're saying is that we would make the change, but we would implement it, the change of the policy essentially next year or something. So we would conduct the review this year, and then we would implement the change of the policy at a later date.
So that would be another way around it. I'm sort of just spitballing here because I don't want 3 or 4 years from now council to be in the position of having to defend what looks like a large increase, where in fact it was just playing catch up. So I'm just sort of pondering. Thank you.
Councillor Middleton Hope.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up on my colleague's comment. It makes very good sense what Councillor Carlson was saying. My secondary concern, I think, with that is we go through a deliberation and we make a decision, and I know this happens on a regular basis, but with regards to salary and or reductions in salary and so forth, we're actually making these decisions for another council. These, whether we vote ourselves a 50% increase or not, has no effect on this council. It has an effect on the council to come.
That with these proposed changes, that would be
right. The reduction, although it had an impact last year, but it potentially has an impact on this council's financial position over the course of the majority of this council's term. So I have some concerns with that in terms of saddling another council with either, as Jeff was saying, having to justify substantial increases or having to manage substantial reductions.
Part of the purpose of this policy is that these processes are more automated, so it's not, they're done by formula and by policy, so it's not something that council typically has to vote on each time. It's done and brought forward for information because we are following the policy.
Thank you for that. That helps clarify it. Thank you.
Councillor Dodick, any questions from yourself?
I have a couple. I just want to, if you can confirm for me that this is a policy document. If it's recommended to council, if council adopts it, that wouldn't prevent any member of council actually bringing resolutions forward to amend it or change it.
Not to my understanding, so.
This question is to the city solicitor or the city clerk. The provision of the policy that requires unanimity, if that were passed, would not a majority vote on council be able to change that? So what I'm saying is the policy says it has to be unanimous to do X, But if a council member decided they wanted to change the policy and brings a resolution, and then all of a sudden the policy by vote of 5-4 is changed, that would affect the unanimity provisions of the policy, and that could be done, could it not?
Yes, if you amended the policy by a simple resolution requiring only a majority, you could do so.
In other words, this document, being a living document, can be changed relatively easy if there's a will of council to do that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Council's policy. A couple of things you didn't change in this that I'm curious about. The comparator cities are remaining the same.
Yes.
Was that looked at? Or is there any suggestion of changing any of them?
We did have a little bit of a conversation about it, but I decided that leaving them static was probably the best approach, because if you change the comparative information, you have a good chance of swaying the numbers either one way or another without, or having a pretty big influence on them.
So to make the policy work the way it's worked in the past, it's best to keep the comparators the same.
Yeah, and it's lumped around sort of the mid-sized cities around Alberta, which are probably our strongest comparator group.
In your investigation, does any other city give acting mayors compensation?
Not that I have found.
What tends to be the deputies?
Yeah, unless it's for an extended period of time that they're acting in there. Because what I've been seeing is that our model of paying the deputy mayor a stipend is a little bit unique. For example, when I was seeing both Red Deer and Medicine Hat, their deputy mayor isn't compensated anything extra unless they're in the term or in the role for an extended period of time. I believe one of them says in excess of a month.
And in some communities, though, one of the ways that they work around it is quite different. You get paid by committee, so you get a flat rate. So there's various ways of doing it, and
Yeah.
This is the way Lethbridge has chosen to do this. When you look at this sort of model for a compensation model, and you look at HR generally, not just city councils, but HR generally, is this a type of policy that you would see in other organizations? Does it stand up to the scrutiny of the industry?
The council compensation is fairly unique, so it's hard to compare to other sort of non-council policies. But in terms of the processes of an annual increase and reviews of the salary, that is fairly standard.
Is defensible as a policy? Okay. Councillor Carlson?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Chris, you mentioned something that City of Red Deer only compensates their deputy or acting mayors if they're in the position for more than a month.
Yeah, that was.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Our rotation is 6 months.
Yeah. Sorry, it's if that acting position is actually steps up into the role of the mayor, like the mayor's gone for more than a month, and that position's performing the full duties of the position.
Okay, thank you. I didn't quite catch that nuance. Thank you.
We've given our deputy and our acting mayor under our procedure bylaw specific jobs as part of their
Yes.
main.
And we expanded it, if I can, Madam Chair, sorry.
Go ahead.
We've expanded it because not just the Agenda Review Committee, they also do other committee work, other duties. And I'm thinking advocacy now as well. I'd be interested if people think the acting mayor should get an increase in remuneration or not. Since
Rachel
it
likes
does
it right now.
Well, it'll be in place for 6 months then,
Sorry.
and because personally, I think just for equity, the acting mayor and deputy mayor do a lot of the same responsibilities. It seems odd to reward one and not the other. That's just my thought.
Councillor Middleton-Holm?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with my colleague. I think there should be compensation for both the deputy mayor and the acting mayor. I am a little bit concerned in regards to the duration when that kicks in. Do I understand that correctly, that it kicks in after a month?
That's in the Red Deer model, I believe. So if the acting position is, if the mayor is away and the acting position is doing the full duties of the position, then that's when the acting pay kicks in.
I would be in favor of any time that the acting mayor or the deputy mayor to assume those roles, they assume the responsibilities and should be compensated for it.
Right now, in our model, the deputy mayor is paid a 10.6% premium for that 6-month term when they're in there. And from my reviews, every council compensation policy has their own nuances and their own ways that they do things to address their own specific needs. Having our deputy mayor compensated and potentially the acting mayor on a regular basis is one of our uniquenesses. It's one of our ways of dealing with or addressing specific ways that we use those positions.
Well, to kind of continue with this, I must be missing something here. So the 10.6% compensation for the deputy mayor / the acting mayor, this is not new. This is something that we're doing now?
Yeah,
For the deputy mayor only.
Yeah, for the deputy. The
Deputy mayor only,
is
but not for the
compensated.
acting
Yeah,
mayor.
The acting mayor is.
So on November 1st, right, I'm deputy mayor right now, from November 1st to April 30th, I get paid 10.6% more than any other member of council. And so on May 1st, that would become Councillor Schmidt-Rempel would get that, right? But then I would give up certain committees that the next deputy mayor takes on. But the acting mayor also takes on agenda review and advocacy,
Dealing with the media.
well, in their term. So there is a bit of extra work now, and we have done that specifically, again, in the procedure bylaw. Agenda review has always been the acting mayor. The advocacy is new. So that's where I think the question has come from, is the acting mayor is named, but has never been extra compensated, and that was the question before us. But the deputy mayor is currently at 10.6% compensated for the 6 months of that term.
So the proposal then is for the acting mayor to also receive that compensation or other?
That was a question I had raised, whether that was something that members of council would like to consider for the
We
acting.
could recommend 5.3%, we could recommend 0%, we could recommend equal. Like that's, Chris is just saying you have possibilities.
Yeah, it's completely open.
Go ahead, Acting Mayor Dodick.
I'm just curious, years ago, when it used to be basically a tax-free stipend, so everyone was treated equally, so you got X amount of dollars, which was not taxable, and the province changed it into taxable income. So I'm curious if you've run across any other municipalities have dealt with a situation where you have some councillors who this may be most of their income or a significant portion of their income, and other councillors where it may be added on to income they have from other sources, and so that their tax consequences are more. So even though it's the gross number is the same, the actual net number can be significantly different based on the tax rate they have to pay. Have you seen that has that been addressed in?
We haven't addressed it because we've always focused on the compensation paid specifically by the city, because that's the aspect of it that we have an impact on. It would be very difficult to address compensation from outside sources by different council members.
No, I appreciate that. My question was, had you heard whether any other municipalities had done something or looked at something like this?
To my knowledge, no, I haven't seen anything like that in the policies.
Are there any other questions from any members of the SPC?
Councillor Croson, or Deputy Mayor Croson, Madam Chair?
Go ahead. Or Belinda works too.
Thank you. Belinda, I guess my question is because we did just change our procedure bylaw. We just did add several committees and duties to the deputy and acting. And this is something we didn't really consider about the remuneration aspect. It might be smart to talk to all of our colleagues um, or maybe just, I guess we've got the deputy and acting right here, and I hate to put you on the spot, because my gut feeling is Reiko and Belinda, we've added reconciliation, we've added advocacy, we've added agenda review, we've added chairing separate special meetings. Do you both think it would be fair? I do, to increase the acting mayor's salary commensurate to the deputy mayor's, but that's me who hasn't sat in either of those positions yet. So I guess it may be unfair to ask you 3 weeks in, but my gut feeling is it would be fair. But I wonder if either of you have an opinion yet.
I think the deputy mayor has about twice as many committees as the acting mayor, because the deputy mayor has EDL, has reconciliation, Lethbridge, and those are not something that the acting mayor has. The acting mayor has advocacy and agenda review. So they don't have the same amount of committees. So I think you're wrong when you say we've added significantly more to the acting mayor. I think the difficulty comes into that one, as you said earlier, and we saw it in the last term, when the deputy mayor does absolutely nothing, and
Yep.
the acting mayor is so kind and does it all.
Yes.
That's where the difficulty comes in. And I don't know, I mean, that's hard to adjust for.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead.
Madam Chair, just to weigh in one final time on this, the responsibilities of the acting mayor, you're suggesting are about half of the deputy, is that correct?
Based on committee load that I see, yes.
And probably that much more than a regular councillor. Then I would advocate for compensation for both positions. And do I understand you correctly if you would propose perhaps half for the acting mayor as compared to the deputy mayor?
That's where my brain is lying, but I'm again, open to discussion.
Kind of where I'm thinking as well.
Madam Chair, I'd support that. That sounds based on actuals, not just gut feeling.
Reiko,
Perhaps I have a pecuniary interest in this.
we all do.
Butcher to the MG. No, you know, I'm okay with, I understand the reasoning if the deputy's getting 10.3 more for the 6 months there, and if the duties are roughly half of that, then yeah, that makes sense to me too. So I'm okay with that.
Well, we have a whole motion that we have to do on this whole thing to forward it forward to council. And there's a couple of recommendations. So the one recommendation was acting mayor. We also have the conversation around the unanimous portion of it. We have the conversation around, some of the stuff was just wordsmithing, but also about moving it from every 2 years to once per term. So those are the things that if we're in agreement to, and then adding the acting mayor compensation, would be the changes that in this that we would be then recommending onto council. So we can look at it as a suite, we can look at them individually. What I am hearing is I haven't heard anybody really going for the once per term, but preferring to stay to the every 2 years, from what I'm hearing. But we haven't asked the workload on doing it every 2 years. Is it something manageable by your department? Or is it, was it suggested because that's what others are doing? Or because it's like, you know what, it's a lot of work, we'd prefer to do it once every term?
It was suggested to line up with others, so.
We wouldn't be overloading your department if we stuck with the status quo on that one.
Yeah, no, this has been the status quo, so it is the norm, so.
Is that what I'm hearing from most people, is that's the one part that people are having the difficulties with?
Agreed.
Jeff?
Agreed. I guess my only question then is if we don't change that, how is that going to work in this term? Because the comparator should have been done last year, or will it be done this year to take effect next year? I'm just trying to think the actual real life impacts of not changing.
So what's the timing on that then?
This would be deemed, or would, I'm just trying to think my way
Come in
backwards
20,
through
like,
this.
would it be for 2023 and then 2025 after the next election, or 2022 and 2020? Yeah,
Yeah, it would be it would be this year and then 2024. So I would essentially start doing it now and to implement on January 1 of 2022, and then we would do it again in 2024.
okay, so that's what we'd be taking to our colleagues, is the work would be done now, and whatever it is implemented January 21st, or January 1st of this year. If we are too high, we get frozen. If we're not, we get the adjustment. Everybody's in agreement with the timing? Okay, so that is what we are suggesting then, is that, and everybody's okay with the unanimous. Again, any council can change it, but this at least makes them wonder why we put it in there. Hopefully makes them wonder why it was put in there.
Sorry, just to correct myself, I was just sort of writing it out. 2022 would be the first year, and then 2024 would be the third year. I believe that.
So it would be, you would review it in 2022 and be applied in 2023? Or do you review it now and it's applied?
Yeah, so, yeah, sorry, I was initially, it would be reviewed this year, implemented next year, and then it would be reviewed again in 2023, implemented in 2024.
Okay. Okay. So those are what we're taking forward, is the unanimous, the keeping it to 2 years, not recommending the changes to once a term, the other minor changes, and making it so it aligns with the new legislation. Do I have all that accurately put together?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
for the picky clerk, I'm wondering if we go to the policy and amend the wording exactly so that we're capturing it exactly. Apologies, but
No, that's okay. There was also one, one place where we have to add a D to a word, so I'll be picky too. I can't remember where it was now. So what we're looking at is the compensation where it goes to once, where was that at? Oh, it's actually under the deputy mayor. When a councillor serves in the role of deputy mayor, their compensation is increased. We need a D there.
Yeah, by 10%.
And then right under that, we would have a suggestion that when a councillor serves in the role of acting mayor, their compensation is increased by 5.3% for the period they're serving in the role.
that's an addition then?
That would be an
Okay.
addition. And then we have to find the spot where it was gone.
Want to vote on this amendment now?
The first and the third year is in section E of the responsibility section on page 3.
Question was, do we want to make that amendment now? I will ask for a mover on that, for the amendment.
Yes.
Okay,
I'll move on that.
and all in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? Okay, so that passed unanimously. All right, so so now we're going to section E.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
just for, I don't know that we have the actual amendments up on the screen as we're voting, just so we're 100%
Yeah.
clear what we're voting on.
so the one we just voted on was adding acting mayor at 5.3%.
Okay.
And now we're at section E, and we are looking at the very first sentence there, and it should be conduct a comparison of city council remuneration and benefits in the first and third years following a general election using the following criteria.
So an addition of first
First
and.
and,
First and third.
and then year has to become years.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I just, so are we amending, sorry to be picky as well, are we amending the clean policy, the original policy, or, because I don't actually have the original in front of me.
we are
only
amending
have-
the clean policy, the
Oh,
one
okay,
that came with
thanks.
changes, and we are just changing some of the changes.
Perfect.
So we have an amendment, we need a mover on the amendment. Okay. And then, any questions on the amendment?
Only, Madam Chair, sorry,
Go ahead.
only that change then predicates a change slightly further down. as I'm trying to read through it, sorry. If we do it in the first and third year, as outlined,
And then the third bullet there as well, adjust the base
Thank you.
salaries by the difference between, of the year, basically, we have to rewrite that, not just the year following the general election, but it's the year following the comparisons.
If I may, the language in the previous policy was effective January 1st of the following year. So if
Okay.
you just revert to that.
thank you.
Of the year following, be of the following year, and then the general election is removed. Okay, so we have a mover on, you're okay with friendly amendment, having both of those as your part of your amendment? Okay, so we have a mover on the amendment. All in favor of the amendment? Okay. So that is the amended statement. We're adding the acting mayor, and we're sticking with 2 reviews a year, within a term. And then the other amendments, as I said, with some language there about removing the tax-free, unvouchered, et cetera, and the unanimous is staying.
That?
Oh, those are already in the
Okay.
revised agenda, revised policy. Any other amendments, changes, concerns, questions before we move? I make a motion on the whole thing. Go ahead, John.
Just one, Madam Chair. Just for my own clarification, is it, and I'm trying to read through here to gain clarity, but are we clear that the salaries will be frozen if the comparison indicates that they're too high? Does it also state that if the salaries are too low, that will be adjusted? And
It doesn't state that, but
I'm sorry?
it doesn't directly state that, but.
I think I'd have I don't know about my colleagues, but I would have a greater comfort level with that because we seem to be adjusting it for, if it goes up, we freeze it. However, if everybody else goes up, we're not going up with the rest. And I think from a fairness perspective, as well as probably attracting some people who are attracted by that, I think that's important as well. Let's be clear on it.
Yeah, that was definitely implied in the policy, but yeah, if we want to clearly state it in there, it's.
Want
Like
to make
to
that
see-
amendment?
So if the comparison shows the average remuneration of the other municipalities is above that paid by the city of Lethbridge, adjustments will be made? Yes. Is that clear? Another point? So I assume you will be moving that, John?
I will, yes.
Okay. Any questions about that amendment, or an addition to the policy, not an amendment? Okay, all in favor of that addition?
It's section E, 4th bullet, right?
Yes. Yeah, it can go before or after the one that freezes, doesn't matter.
And did you say below or above, or what was the exact wording? Sorry?
If the comparison shows the average remuneration of the other municipalities is above that paid by the city of Lethbridge, the salary for the city of Lethbridge position will be amended. I'm assuming going up, but,
I think it should as per policy, because
Oh.
the policy.
will be amended as per policy.
Because it is
It is in there in the
Implicit.
document.
yeah, it's implicit that that's what happens, but I think John's amendment makes it explicit.
All right. I don't think we actually voted on that one. All in favor of that addition?
Oh, we've lost. He's there somewhere. There he is. Okay.
Okay, so we have 2 additions, the acting mayor addition and the addition of this policy statement. And we have adjusted to go back to how it was in the old document, having 2 reviews instead of 1 review a term. And we are staying with the addition of the word unanimous and accepting all of the housekeeping amendments. Are we good? All right, so let's vote on the amended motion. All in favor? Oh, sorry, I need somebody to make the motion first.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
Okay, John makes the motion. All in favor? Any opposed? So we will forward that, and I'm assuming it's going to be the December 14th meeting of council, that will go forward to for our colleagues to review. Thank you, everybody. It's always fun to develop policy as a group.
Your definition of fun needs an amendment, Madam.
It's all language. Thank you so much, Chris, for your time and
Thank you
your
very much.
patience with us this afternoon. Thanks, Chris. So we move now to submissions. And the first one is the submission from Gerald Gauthier on the council work plan update, November 2021. He isn't here, but I would make the assumption that any questions the city manager can answer on this. So most of this is just bringing us all up to speed on what has and happened on those documents. So you can look through, and it is mostly green. There are a couple things that are off track and recoverable, et cetera. Any questions on that? No. Councillor Carlson, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's only tangential to this. I'm wondering, when we did our final report for governance committee to previous council, I wonder if that should have been on our agenda, provided to the first meeting of governance committee right now, so we kind of knew what governance worked on in the previous term and what was sort of left unfinished. Is that something we should review at some point?
Yes, I did notice that, or I did note that we have the status of initiatives, and what I would recommend is that I sit down with the city clerk and look through that and bring recommendations back for what should continue on, what we may want to work on, and if this SBC is in agreement, that will form part of future agendas.
And thank you for that. And just maybe a speedy fix for me is if we could just forward to the members of the committee the year-end or the term-end report of governance committee, just for review, if that's easily done.
I'm assuming that's something we can easily do. So we will send out more reading, because I think everybody wants more reading at this time.
Sorry.
They're going to blame you, not me. That's okay. Are there any questions about the council work plan that has been forwarded on? I would assume, City Manager, this is sort of what will happen with this council as well. We'll be getting something when our strategic plan is done, and it will be similar process.
Yes, Madam Chair. This was included just as a placeholder to enable that discussion, but our intent would be coming forward once we determine a frequency or cadence for how often governance wants to receive an update on the new council strategic plan, that it would be that document that we would be reporting out on.
So we're not looking at the minutiae of last council. We're looking at this as, do you like the concept? Do you want to see this? And how often do you want to see it?
And in particular, it's the how often piece, and our recommendation for consideration there would be quarterly.
I know I found it a very effective way of looking at things, to be able to check off whether we had achieved what we wanted to or not. And it was something that we could then forward on to council, going, here is what is done, so everybody's on the same page. John, you have a question or a comment?
Just a comment, Madam Chair. I agree with the quarterly updates. I think it's helpful for council certainly to be able to be a part of this process. To the city manager, Craig, are you confident that there's adequate capacity corporately to be able to manage all of these tasks and to report back on progress on a quarterly basis?
That's a bit of a challenging question. If I could fast forward to the point where we have clearly developed council priorities and we're bringing those forward to council, reflecting back what we heard during the strategic planning session on Tuesday. So once that's in place, my response would be yes, because that will guide and direct where we assign resources as a priority. At present, I would say no, but I think we've spent the last, well, I know we've spent the last 10 months developing and working to implement a performance management framework that will allow us to properly and effectively manage resources in response to council set priorities. So I think we're just about ready. Once council goes firm on its strategic priorities, then I think we'll be in good shape.
Good, thank you.
So the recommendation before us on this one is to accept it as information and to pass it on as information to council. The only thing I would add when this goes forward to council is just a little note for council that this is sort of what they will be seeing in our term, with the recommended that it'll be coming forward accordingly. Is everyone okay with that, or does anyone have any questions or concerns? All right, so we will just accept that by consensus then, because it seems to be what I'm seeing from everyone. And we'll move on to the next one, which is very similar, except this is coming out of the KPMG. It's the Operational Review Implementation Plan, so it is a similar idea. This one will continue on into this council as some of these projects are wrapping up. But it gives you a sense, again, of what is being worked on and where those are in the process. And you can see also here the priorities and where they are. Since this one is continuing on, you may have questions about what is actually in process, as much as whether we want to see this again quarterly and if this works for the new council. Go ahead, Craig.
Thanks, Madam Chair. The other question here for the committee and all the council to consider is what SPC you would like to see this report brought forward to. So in the terms of reference, or actually I believe it's in the procedure bylaw, Bonnie, if I'm correct, audit committee was assigned the responsibility of directing and monitoring operational reviews of departments across the city. So there are two options. This could, going forward, be brought forward to audit committee, or we could continue to bring it forward to governance. It's really a decision of council.
Now, the beautiful thing is I think you have 3/4 of audit committee here. The only difference would be, I believe it's Nick instead of Jeff.
All right, so I say it should go to audit.
I would, our recommendation would be that that it would come forward to this committee, to governance, only to reinforce the connection and the role of governance in managing operational performance or receiving reporting on operational performance and communicating that to the rest of council. But if there is a desire for it to go to audit, we can certainly accommodate that as well.
I think the reason audit got, future stuff was actually to plan what to look into next, not so much as to monitor the process. So my thinking, it belongs here at governance, because governance sort of responds to what has happened, where audit is supposed to be going, we have a problem here, we should look into it. That's just me. But either way, council and a committee will see it. Any concerns if it stays at governance, or anybody going to push for audit? All right. Councillor Carlson, you're outvoted on this.
I figured. Curse you, Craig.
I'm sure there's something in the code of conduct about cursing the city manager.
Oh yes, it was a positive curse. It was may the road rise to meet your feet. May the wind always be at your back.
So we have the same recommendation here to accept this as information, to forward it to council with the same thing I noted on the last one, to let them know that this is something they will be seeing quarterly as an update coming out of governance. So by consensus, except for Councillor Carlson, everybody okay with that? That moves us along to the third one, which is looking at proposal for integrity commissioner. And this one is a little more detailed. I know it's a submission, but is there something would you like to present a bit on it, or just answer questions? Because I'm not sure. I know Jeff and I have seen some of this coming out, but Rayco and John, would you prefer a bit more information before we discuss it, or just ask questions?
One question I have is this a solution to a problem that doesn't exist? Or, so I guess, are you going to be giving some background as to what prompted this? Is it thinking about things that might happen in the future, or is there a history of complaints that need something like this to resolve it? So that's.
I think we can answer part of that as well, because we did actually do investigations in the last council, and we found some problems with what we created for the Code of Conduct bylaw. in that, one, it does only allow members of council to complain about members of council. There is no public option. And we did have to do investigations, and the way our current one is, we investigate each other, and boy, is that not easy. And then luckily, I think there's only one real investigation last time, but there was a couple that came forward, and it did not work well, because trying to have council investigate council was not an effective way of dealing with it. So I think it partly came from that, and I think also, if I can speak from the Solicitor's Department, what we saw in some other communities as well.
Okay, so I guess the second part of the question is, based on the number of investigations, to use that phrase, I'm just curious, I'm looking at, maybe I'll come to that question once I hear the presentation. I wanted to really delve into the pros of the two options, or the options dealing with retaining someone or having someone on staff or something like that.
So you would like more of a presentation, just a bit of feedback on where we're coming from on this?
Well, yeah, I would like to know why one option versus the other option, or...
Councilor Middleton, Hope, are you okay as well if we do it? I know it's a submission, but I think
Yeah,
you might
no,
want some more information.
I'd certainly like more information. Having spent the better part of the last 30 years instructing this material, I see this as incredibly proactive and very appropriate. So please, I'd like to hear more.
And I thank you, Councillor Dodick, for your comments. And I can give a bit of a brief overview as to where we are now and as to how we got here. This did make its way initially through audit, and it did come about somewhat organically in that it seemed there was a need, and that happened to time with some investigations that kind of put the code in place at the time to the test. And I don't want to say some things were lacking, but there were challenges, it appears. So this did go to council to create the position of Integrity Commissioner on April 20th, and council did pass that resolution. But with that comes the next step as to the terms of reference, which is really, okay, we have this position, theoretically. What's the scope? What do we want them to do? So we're here today, hopefully to pave a clear path ahead to see this is what we want them to be involved in. And thank you, Madam Chair, for raising the aspect of who can make a complaint, because that's the first issue that I think we can address. It's option one in the submission. The current code only allows for members to make a complaint, but the current code also has the investigators of a complaint being the mayor, a tribunal of councillors, all of council, or an investigator, a third party. The issue with having it come from a fellow councillor is, if it's someone from the public that's raised the issue to a councillor, that member of the public is likely going to want to be involved. If it's in a complaint involving them, they have the issue, but it's not them that's ultimately the complainant. So they're left outside of the process. They don't get updates. They're not made aware as to what's happening. So from their perspective, it's an entirely insular, opaque process. There's no transparency. There really isn't anything for them that lets them know that steps have been taken to address the issue, speak with the individual, or make recommendations for sanctions. And unfortunately, that process, it's not defined as to how that occurs in our current code. So there's somewhat of a hole there. So I would say, whether you open it up to the public or not, you have the public making complaints currently, but they're then left out of the process, and it's not as transparent. It doesn't create that public confidence that we want the public to have in council. Going to the three options. If we're going to be establishing the role of an integrity commissioner, and in the report that was initially went to audit, there's somewhat of a write-up that gives the policy background framework as to what the ultimate goal of being an integrity commissioner for local public politics is. It's about generating public confidence in the decisions that you all are making. It's not necessarily about were you in conflict or not, it is, but it's also about creating transparency so that when you make a decision that maybe the public doesn't like, they can at least be assured that you made it openly and with rational thought and not ulterior motives. And of course, all this is just alleged. So we have the role of an integrity commissioner, which is for 2A, purely investigative. They would be on retainer in this sense. So we'd pay them a monthly retainer, usually legal background, conflicts them out of acting against the city. The benefit of that option is it allows them to filter what would be frivolous or vexatious complaints. Complaints that, oh, I can't believe they voted in favor of that resolution. I don't like that decision, I'm going to complain about them. That would just get filtered out by them. That's the true benefit of having that 2A option. The 2B option is that, except if there aren't complaints coming in and we want to get value for those dollars that we're sending them monthly for the retainer, then there's an educational piece so that we're constantly thinking about ethical issues and bettering ourselves in that sense, as well as if they're receiving questions from council members and they get similar questions, they can produce a brochure or do an educational piece that, hey, this is coming up, be aware of this. The main benefit, I think, to council on it, though, is the ability to ask for preemptive advice. So to be able to say to them, here's this issue coming up, this is my neighbor, is it okay if I vote on this rezoning, and get some advice. Built into that is that if a material fact changes or wasn't stated truthfully, then you can no longer rely on that preemptive advice. So if we're looking at value for money, it's our recommendation for 2B in the sense that when there aren't complaints, you're still getting a benefit. There's still an ongoing ethical awareness education piece. 2C, we thought about over the summer, and in being economically conscious, we were thinking of a way to do this without having that monthly retainer. So this would be cleaning up the bylaw to actually establish a procedure and process for what happens when we do hire an investigator. So this wouldn't necessarily involve any changes to the bylaw unless we wanted to open it to the public. But it would create a policy and framework so that when a complaint is received, we know, okay, here is how an investigator is appointed. Here's the process they're going to go through. Here's how the reports are going to look. And one of the big things that it does for us is it ensures that there's procedural fairness for the complainant and for the person being complained about. The downside to the 2C option, which is just that ad hoc investigator cleaning the process, is you don't get that filtering. And I can advise, looking at Calgary's numbers recently, for the 2019-2020 year, because it bridges from April to March, it seems, there were 8 complaints. And their complaints were open to the public. For the 2018-2019, there were 12 complaints. 6 were just dismissed outright by the Integrity Commissioner. All the rest were just dealt with informally, resolved through discussions and education. And the bigger year for the 2017-2018, there were 38, but 21 of those were directly election related with the municipal election in the fall of 2017.
Now that you have the background, do you have any questions about what is being proposed? Okay, John, go ahead.
I have a few questions. So perhaps you can provide me with some insights. What is the purpose of this position? Because it sounds like initially you talked about an investigative position, so is that what you're proposing? But where's the educational component? And we did talk a little bit about educational component, but that seems to have been left out. So what is the purpose of this position? Is to investigate complaints against members of council, to create an independent body that would evaluate, investigate, and make recommendations in regards to complaints specifically against council members? Is there a secondary piece to this that would look at ethical decision-making, not only for council members, but across the corporation? So are you looking at more than one facet of this, or is this just simply one person, which is a complaints director for city council? You talk in terms of integrity. I look at integrity as an entirely different kettle of fish rather than just managing complaints against council members.
For the question, Council Middleton Hill, the goal here today is to set out what we want that scope to be. So in the submission, there are three options. The first option is, just as you had mentioned, it is an independent third-party investigator that's on retainer, will receive the complaints, filter out those that don't need investigating, ones that they find do, investigate, come to a conclusion as to whether or not, in their opinion, based on the factual evidence in front of them, if they think there's merit to it, they would prepare a recommendation. Ultimately, council is the final decision maker.
Would you see that as an ombuds position?
I see an ombuds person more so as to the process, as to whether or not someone's been given a fair shake, but this would actually be finding potential wrongdoing as well. So someone may not follow a process, but that may not be the level of a breach. But I think a big part of an ombuds position is being that independent third party that someone can go to, and if they make a complaint, at least if they're hearing that's not really an issue that's worth investigating, at least it's coming from that independent third party and they've had their chance to kind of tell their story.
So from an investigative perspective then, what kind of a process do you envision? Both by way of filing complaint as well as adjudication as well as appeal.
So part of that is the general framework is set up in the terms of reference and the bylaw itself. But then a good part of that's also probably going to be left up to the actual integrity commissioner themselves as to how they're going about on day-to-day. But as far as timelines for receiving a complaint, that would all be laid out in the amendments to the bylaw. And I have them and I can go through them. Because the key takeaway with what we want to accomplish is we want to ensure that there is procedural fairness for the complainant and for the alleged breach. So the amendments to the bylaw that would be required would be actually adding in a whole section that would deal specifically with the integrity commissioner. And that would handle so that when they receive it, they would have 90 days in order to do their investigation, to make a report. If they do find that there is something, then they need to provide that confidentially to the clerk, which would be provided 48 hours in advance to the complainant and the alleged wrongdoer. And ultimately, it would end up at a closed session, and the rest of council would receive it then as well. But as far as the process that the integrity commissioner would go through as to actually investigating, I would say that that's likely going to depend upon what the complaint is and what it involves. They would have the ability to attend on-site, review records.
Similar to what our auditor does in financial terms, this person would have access to what they need to do their investigation. So online, Councillor Carlson, and I see Mayor Higgin has also joined us. Councillor Carlson, I believe your hand is up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Faust, for the information. Just help me. I know we, previous council, I should say, had some discussion around this, but the bulk of this was brought to audit committee and discussed at audit committee. Am I correct in that?
That's correct, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, because I did try and go through the documents attached. The thing they're lacking is the flavor of the discussion at audit committee. And I wasn't a member of audit at that time, so I just, I wish I knew what their thought processes were and where they were going with this. So, Councillor Crowson, sorry, Madam Chair, were you on audit when this was brought forward?
I was, and we were the ones that recommended it go further on. We
Okay.
saw this as I said, we have the auditor who does the financial part, but we don't have anybody for more of this area. And I know you've been on some of those investigations into the code of conduct. We saw the issues, and we quite liked this because it does have the ability to, again, it's only when needed, so right, we're not, moving forward on anything that's not required. But it does have that outside person looking at this. We are opening up so that the public can put in complaints as well, because that is one of the difficulties we have now. And it really does, we also know that there's been times when people are like, I have a question about ethics, who do I go to? And this provides that sort of piece as well. So we are seeing it as solving a few concerns that we had seen expressed, both from individuals, but also from mistakes we'd seen in the Code of Conduct bylaw. So it was something that audit had recommended go on to all of council.
Excellent, thank you, I appreciate that. And just a further question, if I can. This would have a budget implication, I'm assuming, whichever direction we go, whether it's a retainer or full-time?
That's correct.
Okay. So further to that, then, should this come to council during the budget discussions in the next year? Is that what we're sort of planning, is to flesh it out, make a recommendation, have them included in budget discussions next year as we head into 2023?
If that's the will of this SPC, then we're obviously okay with that plan. What we want to make sure that happens is it continues moving forward, and it moves forward in the way that council actually wants it to move forward. Council has said yes to the position, but as Councillor Milton Hope has raised, that has a lot of nuance and avenues that can be explored, and the scope can vary from minimal to quite involved. And so we're here today to try and find, where do we want that line to be?
But you're right, if this goes on to council, we would have to figure out, A, when does it start, and B, when's the budget coming out of, if it does move forward.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Do you have any sense, like if we were to go to option B, what sort of cost we're looking at? If you could, comparators with other communities, that doesn't, our auditors, when they do the work, they say what they're going to do and they do a fixed amount. This, of course, is going to be a little bit different. You've got the retainer, which is easy to identify, but if you've got an hourly rate with no cap on it, you can run into some problems. So do you have any sense? I'm not holding to you to it, but just a rough idea of what you're looking at in terms of a monthly retainer and a cap on the work?
Well, looking at the other communities, and BC's, there aren't really any, so throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan, $2,000 seems to be about where most will land on the retainer amount. And then the monthly or the hourly rates, they were around $150 and up to $250 seemed to be where the bulk were, which is fairly comparative with other consultants as far as I can see from the community.
And the good thing is, if we all behave, it's only at the retainer.
Madam Chair?
Oh, we'll go to John and then you, Jeff. Go ahead, John.
Oh, sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Madam Chair, I've got a few questions. First of all, so please provide some insights here. It seems to be very focused on an investigative position. So we would need to obviously hire someone with an investigative background and / legal background to be held on retainer or paid on retainer bi-monthly for the purpose of investigating complaints against members of council specifically, okay? Can you give me a flavor for how many complaints we have on an annual basis against members of council that actually require an investigator?
I unfortunately don't have that information.
And again, it's difficult because if this goes forward, it's going to open up to the public, which may increase the number of complaints. But in last term, after we wrote the code of conduct, there was only 2 complaints made, and that's, again, only council to council, and only 1 resulted in an investigation.
That's helpful. So we're a little bit fewer than Calgary.
A little bit.
All right. Just for clarification, this is very much an investigative position. This is not an educational position. This is not a position where this person is actually going to have anything to say about ethical conduct beyond the investigative component that that person's involved with.
Well, if we choose 2B, then we also have that person that you can go to and you say, I am thinking of sitting on this committee, or this vote is coming up, and you can go and say, I would like your advice as the integrity commissioner. Now, again, you choose whether or not to take the advice, but you could go to that person if we choose 2B. So there is the educational component under that menu item. If we do 2A, you don't have that.
I'd like to expand that and have it not as an individual, but as a council. That model has been very effective in other organizations where you utilize a council approach. So if a person has a concern specifically about an ethical challenge or an ethical dilemma that that person is facing, there is a council that is capable of providing sage advice to that person in regards, or at least allowing them to work through an ethical decision-making model to examine the dilemma that they're faced with and arrive at a decision that they can justify to other people. So I think rather than just one individual, that council approach has proven to be quite effective elsewhere. And my last question, I guess, would be, how does this align with other initiatives corporately in regards to what we're doing from an ethical decision-making perspective elsewhere in the corporation?
I think that would be more to the city manager. He's responsible for the ethics of his staff.
Yeah, could you expand a little bit, Councillor Middleton-Hope, on that
Sure.
question?
So ethical decision-making, for an example, with the police service is a very comprehensive model that every member of the police service, both sworn and civilian, have to go through. There is a model that is followed. There's a series of examinations of ethical dilemmas that police officers are put through to examine that. So there's a very significant training component to this, which also works in tandem with professional standards to examine the conduct of officers. So I think what we're asking, beyond a policy that talks in terms of behaviors around council members, what I'm looking for is something that's perhaps more robust, that not only looks at investigating complaints, but also provides for a framework for appropriate behavior. So that has a very significant training component in it. So I'm asking, I know that does exist. As I indicated, I've been instructing this for many, many years, and I know that kind of approach is effective, has a degree of effectiveness. I wanted to know if there are other areas of the corporation that are currently engaged in this, and is there an appetite for discussing this at this level in regards to how it might be applied to city council members?
Yeah, I think the genesis for, I'll answer that by saying that the genesis for this position and the information that Adam shared today was really directly in response to how to manage complaints against council members, and in particular, as was highlighted, complaints from the public, because the current policy or code of conduct bylaw did not allow that. So when it comes to the corporation and how we ensure ethical decision-making inside the corporation, I would say at present that's very much a separate stream, and the responsibility for that would fall to myself and people leaders throughout the corporation. We're not as formal in training and education around ethical decision-making and ethical decision-making models as a police force would be, as an example, nor do we have sort of a professional standard articulated for general public service entities that would really be the driving force behind that training. But I would tell you it's an ongoing conversation, and I would probably leave it at that at the moment. My sense is that it would be best to proceed and look at this from a council perspective, which was the genesis and the real focus of this. But we're certainly happy to come back and brief council. I am on what we're doing internally inside the corporation today and where we look at going in that regard. I'm happy to do that at any time.
I think you're thinking from the public, but again, internally, if there's an ethical concern, there is a whistleblower policy and everything that, you know, our staff have as well. So there are those policies, and those have been discussed at audit in the past. I don't think governance is the place for those, but those have been looked at by audit committee.
Councillor Milton Hope, if I can just add, council is somewhat unique in that you're on an island a bit.
With alligators around us.
I think it's important that any investigator or anyone involved in the ethical type piece have some separation from council. And in the solicitor's office, it's difficult because we can't provide advice to individual councillors on these issues, right? We need to provide advice to council as a whole. So we're not able to assist in that. And you certainly don't want someone in administration to be knowing about potential conflicts, involved in investigation, and then having to come here and present in front of that individual and ask for a resolution. It just creates a lot of issues, and our bylaw does not allow for any sort of overlap, but that's something that I'm really intrigued by your comments about a council of advisors.
Don't see Councillor Carlson. You don't have any more questions? You don't have to have questions. I was just asking.
I did have my hand up. I guess we're getting sort of into the vein of what's the Latin? Quis custodiet ipsos custiodes, who watches the watchman, so to speak. But with this, I guess my only question right now is what's the timeline on this? Is there a hurry up right now? Is a decision necessary? Because I think even Mr. Dalton and Mr. Faust mentioned that council should maybe be brought up to speed on the discussions. It was only audit committee in previous council that sort of discussed this and thought about this.
Respectfully, council has already passed a resolution in principle of moving forward with a integrity commissioner. It is the details that we were working on. So we can always review with them if that is necessary, but they have seen this. You may have been gone that meeting.
Well, I'm talking the new council. And I don't think I was gone that meeting. But I guess what I'm thinking is there a rush? Is it possible to table this to our next meeting and give council the heads up that we're going to be discussing this? They may have an interest in at least listening. That was just my only question there.
Okay, so let's go. Is there any rush on this from anyone's concern?
Councillor Carson, there isn't a rush on my end, or on administration's end, as far as I'm aware. We do just want to be moving it forward. We think it's a useful step forward in the process, and we do see an issue with the current bylaw that we'd like to correct at some point in time. But so it's not a rush now. If a slew of complaints come in, we may feel it a bit.
Yeah, true that.
We have a few options, because yes, hearing the questions, I think there are a lot of questions still on this, and if this group has this many questions, so will the rest of council.
Exactly.
So that is what I'm hearing. So whenever this goes forward to council, I think it has to be prepared as a presentation, not as a submission from this committee. I think, or I mean, it'll come from this SBC whenever it goes to council, but I still think it would need to be a presentation. But what Councillor Carlson is suggesting is there an interim way of getting this information so they can stew on it before it ever becomes publicly in front of them? Is that what you're sort of suggesting? Because you think they need some stew time on this?
Well, or at least an awareness that we're discussing it, and they may have some input, which is why I was thinking if we tabled it to our next meeting, postponed to our next meeting, Bonnie, if we postpone it to our next meeting, and in the interim send them the heads up, this is what's going to be on the agenda. If you have thoughts, if you'd like to learn a bit more about where this is moving, to come to that meeting. That was sort of my way of thinking.
So that's one mechanism, and that, again, if they don't show up, then we know that they're not, like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any other mechanism that we could share with them, or is this what you're thinking, postpone this for 2 weeks, put a better invite to the rest of our colleagues in 2 weeks, or not 2 weeks, in next month? Mr. Dalton?
One other option might be if this committee was comfortable, would be to refer it to council for a conversation, and then council could have that conversation. They could refer it back to the committee. They would have time to read the material that's been prepared. That might be another option.
But we could do that. It's never, I don't think it's been done, but we could recommend on as a presentation with the recommendation that don't pass it, but refer it back to us after the presentation.
Madam Chair, I think that would be helpful in terms of seeking additional input. I'd like to see, from my perspective, I'd like to see a more robust examination of what kind of a process you envision for here's the inception of a complaint to birth to death. I'd like to see how that would be managed. And I'm afraid I don't see that here. Perhaps that's not the purpose, but I would like to see more of that, and I think our council colleagues would like to see some of that as well if we're going to be eventually providing feedback on it.
Then I would recommend that the presentation include this as well as the bylaw, the Code of Conduct bylaw, because some of that is in there, and so it might also be an educational piece on the Code of Conduct bylaw.
Now, we do have a track changes version of the bylaw that I can include. And I can also prepare a more robust actual presentation.
And I would say, would we be in agreement that we send on to them that we're suggesting option 1 and 2B, is what I'm sort of hearing. And if they choose, when we send it forward to them, if they choose to pass it that day, that's up to them. I mean, once it's in council's hands, it's their choice. But when it's brought forward, we can say, we're bringing this forward because we think you need to know about it. If you want to refer it back to us, we would be okay with that. If you're happy, it can move forward. Because, once it goes to council, remember, we wouldn't be in control of where it happens to it. Oh, it does. So everybody okay with that being the mechanism for moving forward?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Just from my perspective, I prefer the option of just postponing it for a month and putting out the invitation with the relevant information. We can have a much more free-flowing discussion, and Mayor Hagan has joined us today. Other members of council could join us at that meeting, and we could have a much more free-flowing discussion rather than at council. So I'd rather it just be postponed for a month and come back to this committee with the invitation to all of our colleagues that if this is something of interest to them and they'd like to learn more, they should attend. That was my thought originally.
Okay, so 2 options. Send it to council as a tentative or postpone till the January meeting. I guess it'd actually be 2 months. And invite council to the rest of it. Oh, Mayor Hagan, go ahead.
I know that I cannot vote or anything, but I was just listening here. I really like what Councillor Carlson had mentioned, that if this information is and let members go through it, other members, our other colleagues go through this, and to come back to this same committee, because I think if it goes to council and it recommends back, it might be a little, just my personal opinion. Now, obviously, I can't vote on this, but I really like what Councillor Carlson presented there.
Okay. So 2 options. Send it back to, or put it to ourselves, postpone it till the January meeting. I'm assuming there's nothing in December. with an invite to everybody on council, letting them know this is something you probably want a heads up on, or sending it to council. What do you think?
I'd rather just send it to the council and have it done at one and the same time.
Okay, John?
I agree with Councillor Dodick. Him over there. I agree with that.
I suspected it would be coming back to us after that, so you guys probably are not going to be saving us any time by sending it to council, but are you okay with that?
I think the opportunity to receive input from council in regards to something I think is potentially as important as this is probably healthy. If that means that we bring it back, and Jeff, I'm sorry I won't be here on December the 25th, because that's a month from now. But I think if we either bring it back in January back to this committee to have further discussions, having had input from council, that's the goal that I'm looking for.
Jeff, you okay with that?
I'm okay either way. Further to Mayor Hagan, I just thought if we send it to council, they're likely going to discuss it for 3 hours in a meeting and refer it back to this committee anyways. So I was just trying to cut that short, but if that's the will of the committee, I'll support it.
Well, the reason I think this forces council to look at it as a whole. I mean, as opposed to saying, well, here's the information, if you have input, please come here. But
I suspect we have the same four of us here, and maybe Councillor Schmidt-Rempel next time. So, all right, looks like we are going to take it to council then, and we will see what we see.
Is that the
Madam Chair,
December 14th, sorry, the December 14th council meeting?
14th, work for the city manager and the presenters?
We'll just need some time to prepare the supplemental material and with the, and I think we'd need to abridge the filing deadlines, Madam Clerk. Is that correct, for new material?
This would just be, this material would be included into the council meeting, but if you have a presentation supplementary?
Well, that was the question, and I heard Councillor Middleton Hope suggest that he'd like to see a complete timeline or life cycle and a new submission on the value of the whole product as well. So we can do that, but I just want to make sure if that's the will of the committee, we do that. And then I'll just check with Mr. Faust with how much time we'd need to do that.
Yeah, you have a week tomorrow to have it in.
Yeah, and I would just like to jump in support of that and start conditioning those muscle movements to be realistic about when we direct additional work and then coming back, because you'll see shortly that we're meeting the submission timelines about 23% of the time for reasons just like this. So I defer to Adam, but we should be realistic about how soon we can bring it back.
Well, we've heard there's no, I mean, we want to move this along, but we've heard there's no real push on it. The next one would be then, you would have to have it done by the 31st of December to have it in for the agenda review on the 3rd. Is that what I'm, because the 11th is council meeting?
18th is
sorry,
a council
18th.
meeting.
So you'd have to have it in by the 7th of January for the 10th agenda
Correct.
review.
Madam Chair, I think that's very doable. I honestly think the 14th is doable, but I would like to ensure that the product that actually goes is well thought out and fleshed out, especially to go through from birth to death, as Councillor Middleton Hope has suggested.
I'm going to check when our governance meeting is in, okay, and we meet on the 27th with governance, so if it comes back to us, we'd have time for that as well. By consensus, we will go with that direction. We'll see it in January at council. All right, and that means we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And our one viewer probably quite enjoyed that.